was such a great episode. Why didn't more people listen? Sometimes I feel like, is this thing even on? Hi, my name is Neil Matthews. I too have been exactly what I just described. Wondering and wanting a second set of ears to hear my show. Well, that's when I came up with Podcast Insight Solutions, providing you insight and solutions into your show. Whether that be improving your interview style, improving your questions, getting the guests to really come alive, or maybe it's the audio. That's always a little shaky, or maybe it's the editing. I could get better at that. Well, that's where Podcast Insight Solutions comes in. I'd like to listen to your show, provide a second set of ears, and help you come up with solutions to those problem areas in your show. Right now, we're offering a free 30-minute consultation to take your show from meh to shining like a diamond. At Podcast Insight Solutions, we're transforming podcasts with expert insight. Book your consultation today.
Welcome home to Other People's Shoes, where every step tells a story. Get ready for an emotional journey like no other with Homecoming. Our homes are more than just a place. It's where we find safety, comfort, and connection through intimate conversations, heartfelt anecdotes, and inspiring stories. We believe that everyone deserves to feel welcomed and secure in their own home. Let us remind you of the beauty and warmth that home should bring. Other People's Shoes, where every step leads you to Homecoming.
Welcome home. Welcome home to Other People's Shoes. As you know, I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for joining me today. Super excited that you've hung out with us today, that you've stopped by the house. Clearly, you made it through the gate. Now, let me tell you, we do have one of those, I call them rich people gates. At least that's what I did when I was growing up. I don't think we're rich, by the way. My wife keeps telling me, and I say the us, my daughter included in the us, that we're house poor. We've built this amazing house that looks like an Airbnb, fancy Airbnb, by the way, less and less every day. She has now put up pictures on the wall. She's now started to make it her home. Now, I say her home on purpose. About 6 feet away from said house is the shoe shack. And let me tell you, it is an explosion of, well, it's an explosion of North Carolina. And it is an explosion of my personality and who I am. Back to the gate, you actually have to enter in a code to gain access past the gate. And so I'm wondering about that for you today as we dig into another amazing story. Do not get the code wrong. I guarantee this about this person because I know enough about her. You're going to want to get full access. You want to get fully ingrained into her story. Help me welcome in my new friend, Lauren. Lauren, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. Man, that is a great introduction. Thank you so much.
Well, it's not the traditional ones, where we talk about your background and we talk about all the things that you've accomplished and all the things you've done. I don't know. I went away from that as a creator. I thought there's a great way I can weave in a fun kind of kickoff story with you or with the person. I don't know. I thought it was more exciting. So we kind of went away from that. I mean, people send me their bios and I look them over. I'm like, oh, cool. That will help build the story. I really write my own.
Well, I'm excited. I feel good. And I've got some blue on to match you a little bit today. So that's good.
I mean, I don't want to judge the blue that you're wearing. I know people can't see it, but I'll help describe it. It's a royal blue, which is great because, you're royalty in some respects. We all are royalty in some respects. It is more of a royal blue than a light blue, would you say?
Yes, it's not North Carolina blue. I'm sorry.
That's what I was looking for.
I know.
But it's okay. We'll still let you on the show, even though you're wearing royal blue. So let that be known. Let that be said. Let that be spread around the world, okay?
Okay, done.
Still wear royal blue and come on. Well, Lauren, help us with this. As I mentioned, we have our newly built house. I'm really bad at this still, and I'm trying to get better. I've gotten some Crocs. I've got some slides, I think as the kids call them. I'm trying not to wear my shoes in the house, and it's really hard. I get home. I don't want to take my shoes off at the door. I bet you would be okay with that. You'd be okay with maybe taking your shoes off at the door. And if we were to maybe find your shoes at the door of our new house, what pair of shoes might we find?
I work as a physical therapist, so I'm standing on my feet all day showing people exercises. So I wear tennis shoes. I like New Balance. One of my coworkers is real stylish. He always has these cool shoes, so I need to try to keep up with them. I like the fun, different colors, make it bright and fun. So that's my favorite. And then when I get home, I take them off because I like to be no shoes.
Yeah, see, that's what my wife is trying to get me to embrace is the no shoes no access mentality. I don't know about the access. Sometimes she'll just give me a kiss, welcome home kiss, and then she'll look down and she'll go, "Oh, I see that you still have your shoes on."
That's your nice hint.
And that's why I'm like, okay, hold on. Let me go untie them and set them back out by the garage where there is like this minefield of her shoes, by the way. We do have 2 shoe racks nearby. By the way, both of them are not mine, just for the record to be shown. I should actually do a video on that. We'll press forward. Lauren, help us with this. Again, we're in this new season, new series, exciting. I always get excited about new seasons. I don't know what chapters we will read and what we may encounter. And it almost feels like a little bit of a E.B. White or a Charlotte's Web type mentality, like the next chapter is going to be more amazing. And I feel like this season really is shaping up to be that way. But help us with this. When we talk about homecoming, what does that bring to you?
Well, I've moved a lot throughout my life, what I went through as a child, and we'll get into that. So homecoming can be a little bit of fear, can be a little of the unknown, a little anxiety. It can also be some excitement because it's new beginnings and a little bit of a do-over. So I think there's a lot of emotions that can come with that statement of homecoming.
Were you ever the homecoming princess or perhaps queen?
Wonderful question. I was a football sweetheart. That's a cool part of my story. I went to Lindale High School, home of Miranda Lambert, by the way, country singer, songwriter. My first year there at the high school, I'd gone through a really difficult childhood. I needed a do-over. I lived with the Lamberts in the house that built me. And Beverly Lambert worked at the school. She was in our church and our life group, my life group leader. And man, she got me plugged into everybody she knew. That first year, I was a football sweetheart. I didn't even know what that was. Like, I didn't know anybody. Her father, Rick, actually walked me across the field that year. My stepfather was in my life. Rick was the man that knew me since the day I was born. He was that father figure throughout my entire life. So that was an amazing honor to have him walk me that day.
Football sweetheart.
Football sweetheart.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Never heard of that. So that's got to be in Texas. That's got to be a Texas thing.
Of course. Where else?
Okay. Well, that's cool. You know, it's interesting you bring up Miranda Lambert, truly. I love Y2 Country on XM radio. That song does often play on that. I listened to it the other day, just kind of passing, and then it came on again because that's how XM radio works. It's much like radio. They have the cycle of songs and the circle of songs that they play, and it came on again, and I actually sat down, stopped everything I was doing, and sat down, and I thought, man, this is such a fitting song for our homecoming series. The whole premise behind, again, the house that we're building. I've never built a house before. Others have, and they're like, oh, it's the most amazing thing ever. They're not lying. It's true. Now, mind you, I had zero, and I emphasize this again, zero involvement in our house. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I didn't pick out the cabinets. I don't know the color. I didn't know any of that. I turned it all over to my wife, and some people honestly scoffed at that and maybe threw some rocks and said, Neil, you got to be involved. And I said, listen, here's the thing. I don't care what color it was, paint, the cabinet. It didn't matter to me. If mama's happy, I'm happy. For me, when I heard that song again by Miranda, it really made me think, how do those homes shape us? And how do those things in life as we grow up, how do they affect us? And so maybe that leads into my very amazing question to start out with is, tell me how home was like for you and that home that did build you, and how did it shape you to where you are now?
You know, Neil, I can't listen to that song, or I can't go to one of Miranda's concerts without crying, or even talking to you right now, tears coming down my face. Boy, that song is just my life. It's a small little house with one bathroom we all shared and a cloth foot bathtub, broken down home. The family, the people, the healing is what made that home. Why am I so emotional about this? My home life, my beginnings started rough. My parents met in the Dallas area. My mom is from Florida, raised as a Christian. She knew Jesus for a long time. My father's from Jordan. Jordan is near Israel, and he was raised Muslim. And they met in Dallas. And, you know, when you're 19, you're not thinking about all these things. You're just like, oh, he's handsome, and you fall in love and you get married. Life begins. 4 years into their marriage, my mom became pregnant. My dad was so excited. He told my mom that his dad was sick and he needed to go to Jordan. My mom was like, okay, no problem. Weeks turned into months that he was gone. Remember, my mom's from Florida, so she was in Dallas. The only people she didn't have family. She had Miranda's parents, Bev and Rick, were her best friends. And I've learned that sometimes God puts people in your life that are going to be closer than family. So she began to worry. My dad and my mom weren't communicating much at this time. She didn't know what was going on. She thought she had been abandoned. So because of that stress, she actually had me, I think, like 4 to 6 weeks early, went into labor. The Lamberts were actually with my mom when this happened and took her to the hospital. My dad came back shortly after that. My mom, you can imagine, her emotions are all over the place with a newborn, first-time mom, angry, tired, all the things. My dad came back and he looked different. He was dressed in traditional Jordanian clothing. He was going to the mosque and praying. My mom was like, "What is going on? Where have you been?" And he said, "Well, I went to Jordan to make a home for us." Speaking of home, she said, "What do you mean? We never talked about this." And he said, "Well, I found a job. I found a house. I want to raise Lauren and Jordan with my family and my beliefs and my traditions." By the time I was 6 weeks old, my mom was filing for divorce. It was pretty quick. It was a drastic change. She was shocked. That's how my life began. I had a great relationship with my dad. My mom had full custody of me. I'd go see him on the weekends, typical divorced family. My parents actually got along really well. Anytime my mom needed help and my dad wanted to spend more time with me, they worked out the weekends. My dad remarried to a woman, her family's from the Middle East. She was raised in the United States. They began their own family. And so I had two little siblings, which I loved. I'd go back and forth. I'd go to their house and I got to be the big sister. And with my mom, it was really just the two of us. We lived in a townhouse. We'd do our chores together and then go run our errands. That was my life until I was 7. At the age of 7 is when everything really changed drastically in my life. My dad asked my mom if I could go and stay one extra night with him and go trick-or-treating with my siblings. And my mom was like, "Yeah, no problem at all." And I was so excited. That year, I actually found a picture the other day because I'm in the middle of writing a book about my story. I have a podcast where I share the details, and digging through my old book and pictures, I found a picture of myself at this time. I had a cheerleading outfit for my costume that year. It wasn't North Carolina blue, it was blue and yellow. And I had pigtails and bright red lipstick. I was so excited when my dad picked me up. I had my pink little suitcase that's going to grandma's on the front. I get in the car. "Where are my siblings? Where's my stepmom?" And my dad looks at me as I'm sitting in the back seat and he's like, "Well, I've got a big surprise for you." And "Yeah, we're going trick-or-treating." And he was like, "No, we're going on a trip. I'm taking you to the airport." And I said, "What do you mean airport?" And he said, "Well, I want to take you to Jordan so you can meet your family you've never met." Typical 7-year-old, I start asking all the questions. "What do you mean? My mom never told me we were going on a vacation. She said we were going trick-or-treating. Does she know that we're doing this?" Well, the more and more questions I asked him as he's driving to the airport, the more angry he became. And he wasn't really an angry kind of person. Every kid knows how to push their parents' buttons. I've always been a people pleaser, and I knew the more I asked, the more irritated he became. So eventually I just stopped asking the question. If you're a single parent, or I guess really a parent, you know how hard it is to stop your workday and go have lunch with your kid at school. It's a big deal. It doesn't happen very often. That Monday, my mom decided to go have lunch with me. You can call it intuition or luck, but I really feel like it was the Holy Spirit talking to my mom that day. My mom got to my elementary school. I'm standing out in the courtyard, and as the kids are lining up for lunch, she's looking and looking and looking, and she doesn't see me anywhere. And the teacher comes over, and my mom's like, "Where's Lauren?" And the teacher tells her, "Well, Lauren never came to school today." Well, her immediate thing is frustrated. The last thing she said to my dad is, "Make sure Lauren goes to school Monday." She walks over to a payphone instead of getting in her car and going back home. And there's no cell phones in 1987 is when this happened. She dials from that payphone my dad's house, and it rings and rings and rings. Nobody answers. Then she calls. My dad owned a restaurant. She calls the restaurant, and they told my mom that my dad had not gone to work that day. Well, the anger now becomes fear, and all the little red flags begin to go off. My mom had gone to Jordan 9 years before this had happened, before my parents got married, to meet my dad's family. She remembered the main airlines into Jordan at that time, it was called the Aliyah Airline. Headquarters were in New York City. Standing at that payphone, her third phone call was to the headquarters. And she asked the lady when she comes on the phone, "Can you please tell me if you have a Lauren and Ollie on your flight reservations landing in Jordan today?" And of course, the woman says, "Ma'am, I can't give out that kind of information." And then my mom's voice changed, and she said, "Can you please? I think my ex-husband's taken my daughter." The lady paused, And she said one moment, and then she came back on the phone and she said, yes, I do. I have a Lauren and Ollie landing, and I'm on Jordan this evening. That was the moment that my mom knew that my dad had taken me. Her fourth phone call from that payphone was a 911 page. We had pagers back then, to Rick Lambert. Rick was a police officer in Dallas, had recently retired, and him and his wife Beverly started a private investigation company called Lambert and Lambert. They happened to be working together at the courthouse in Dallas that day, which didn't often happen. They usually went their separate ways. On this occasion, they were together, and Rick got that page, and he went to the clerk at the courthouse and said, "Can I use your phone?" Beverly's standing beside him, and Rick dials my mom, and my mom begins to tell Rick what had happened. They jump in their car and they drive 90, 100 miles down the expressway to my mom's townhouse in Richardson. They meet my mom there, and that's when they begin to unravel what to do. One of the first things Rick said to my mom was, "You need to go to Radio Shack," if anybody remembers Radio Shack, "and go get a recording device and put it on your phone." And Rick recently told me, I just interviewed the Lamberts last week, which is amazing. He was saying that that was sort of standard whenever you're investigating people, to record the phone calls, to try to get any kind of hint of where I might be, any kind of detail. Your emotions are all over the place and you're not going to remember everything. And then when you're calling the police or the State Department, any kind of guidance, you can go back and listen to those recordings. When I started this process, when I really felt God calling me to tell my story, I'm like, God, how am I going to do this? I remembered my mom giving me a box, and she wrote in a Sharpie across the outside, Jordan. I put that box in my garage when I was 20 years old. If you've gone through something really hard, if you've gone through trauma, that's what you do. Shove stuff in a box or a closet and you put it away and you don't want to look at it. Well, in this process of me writing my book, it's like God reminded me of that box. So I pulled it out, dusted it off, and I found the Ziploc bag full of cassette tapes. And then I thought, what have I done? In the Texas heat in my garage, are these cassette tapes even going to work? I prayed. I ordered a cassette tape player from Amazon because I don't have one of those anymore. And I began listening to these recordings, listening to these phone calls that my mom made, talking to my dad. I have to say, it's really hard to listen to. They began recording the phone calls. Every time my mom would call Jordan, she began calling every day, begging to talk to my dad, begging to talk to me. And most of the time it was no English, no English, no English, only speak Arabic. And then my mom's begging, please. And then they say, no, Ollie's not here. Lauren's not here. They're not here. Well, they were lying. Phone call after phone call of her desperate. And then Rick and Beverly are calling the police. They're calling the State Department. They're calling everyone they know. Every day the answer is, I'm sorry, I can't help you. This is a Jordanian father that's taken their child. It's out of our jurisdiction. There's nothing we can do. The State Department mailed my mom this big manila envelope full of paperwork of what to do if your child's been abducted, and all these support groups. So she begins calling the support groups. She's doing whatever she can. Phone call after phone call. She's talking to parents that have never seen their children again. Been gone 5 years, 6 years. So her emotional state, can imagine, she's not eating, she's not sleeping, she's distraught. Her mind is all over the place. Beverly and Rick had moved in with my mom and moved Miranda into my mom's townhouse. They were with her day and night trying to help her. They stopped everything to help her. One day, and I believe it's a God thing that this conversation could have been in person, but I actually have the tape recording. Beverly called my mom and she said, Kathy, you have got to get away from all of the noise, all of the chaos. You've got to get away from the phone, get away and be alone with God. And you need to pray. And my mom just breaks down on the phone and she's crying. She's like, yes. And will you pray for protection over Lauren wherever she is, that God will protect her? And then Beverly says, Kathy, I remember reading a book about fasting and how fasting brings you the closest to God. And my mom just started crying. She said, you're right. I need to get away and I've got to fast and I've got to pray and I've got to hear from Jesus. And I've got to get rid of these stupid cigarettes. My mom had smoked for a long time, but she told me recently at this point, she was smoking 2 cigarettes at a time all day long. She was stressed out of her mind and she was just a basket case. Rick he had jumped through a bunch of hoops to get an appointment for my mom to go meet with the grand jury in Dallas. Meeting with the grand jury was going to help them get a warrant out for my dad's arrest. The warrant would be if my dad came back to the United States, because see, my stepmother and siblings, they were still in the States. My dad had sent them off to go stay with some relatives the week that he took me, so that way they wouldn't know what he was doing. And my stepmother kept telling him, I'm never going to Jordan. You're never going to see your children unless you bring Lauren back. I am not Lauren's mother. She has a mother. You need to bring her home. That was sort of the thought, is maybe he'll just come back and they can arrest him and then maybe they can get to me. My mom went to that grand jury meeting that day, and Rick reminded her, Kathy, not a whole lot's going to come out of this, just a step in the right direction. My mom stood in front of that jury and she began to tell her story of me being taken. After listening, they told her, we're so sorry. There's nothing we can do. The United States does not have a treaty with Jordan. This is international crisis. We cannot get involved. Then my mom just sort of swallowed and began to break down and cry. And she said, can I be honest with you? It's not fair that we spend billions of dollars in foreign aid every year, and you're telling me you cannot help me get my child back? It's just not fair. Everyone in that jury room began to nod their head and agree with her. One man stood up by the name of Al Zapanta. Al Zapanta is a really big deal, has a lot of awards in the military. He's still in the political world. He's still working today, and he's in his 80s. He opened his wallet and handed her his card and said, if you're not happy with the State Department, here's my card. Give me a call. I'll see what I can do. She put that card in her pocket and told him thank you and walked out. I've heard these cassette tapes too. Even at that point, she was still distraught and hopeless, because if you've been through some hard stuff, you know what your mind is like. You're so clouded by depression, fear, that you can't see any hope. And that's where she was. She got back to the townhouse, grabbed her bag, grabbed her Bible, and she looked at Beverly and said, I don't know where I'm going. I'm going to get in my car and start driving, but I'll be back. I just need to be alone and get away. And so Beverly said, don't worry. I'll take care of all the phone calls. If someone answers, I'll screen everything. We won't let anyone know what's going on. And so my mom left.
That's huge. That is just amazing, the series of events. So if you can, tell me what it was like for you and Jordan.
Yeah.
What was life like?
Life in Jordan. I had never been outside of the United States. I think I'd gone to Florida, and that's it, because that's where my grandmother lives. Didn't know how to speak Arabic. First time to go to Jordan, first time to meet all of my family members. And like I said before, my dad was very loving, and like the Disney dad is what I call it. In Jordan, things were different. And at 7, I didn't understand the cultural differences. I didn't understand the rules. When we talk about praying to God, I thought God was Jesus. I didn't know the difference. In Jordan, my dad really left me with my grandmother and my aunts. It was their job to take care of me. It was their job to like feed me and bathe me and do all the things. It was the women's job. My dad really didn't have that much involvement with me there. It wasn't the man's job to do those things, which was drastic change. Most people only spoke Arabic. A few of my relatives spoke English. That was hard. All the children only spoke Arabic. The food was different. We sat on a floor to eat. We would eat with our hands. You would take pita bread and scoop up the hummus and scoop up the rice and sort of ball it up, and you eat with your hands. There's no utensils. The bathroom situation was very hard for me as a 7-year-old little girl. It was a hole in the ground with a chain above. So you would go to the bathroom, you would squat over the hole, you pull the chain, and they did not use toilet paper. You would clean yourself with your hand. That was very hard for me. I remember one of my uncles, it's like the homes were like apartment buildings, and each family member lived in a different apartment. One of my uncles had, I believe he had polio, so he had to have an actual toilet to use. I would hold it until I could walk the stairs to his apartment and use his restroom, but many times I couldn't make it all the way and I'd have an accident, and then I'd get in trouble for having an accident. So those are the big things I remember. And then the day my dad told me I was going to go to school, I knew I was no longer on a vacation, because he kept saying this is a vacation. And I kept saying, when am I going to see my mom? And then I was like, okay, what about my stepmom? What about my sibling? And he kept saying, well, she can't come because she's pregnant, and don't worry, you'll talk to your mom eventually. When I started going to school, I knew this was not a vacation anymore. The more questions I asked, the more angry he would become. I just came to the point where I'm not going to see my mom again. I was speaking Arabic. I was learning how to write Arabic. I was the oldest kid in kindergarten. I was the oddball. When we would go to the mosque, I would have to cover my hair. I had to dress differently. The women would go pray, and we would use a prayer rug. I was like, why am I praying to God on a prayer rug? Why do I have to do these movements? I didn't learn those things. It was a huge, drastic change in my life, not knowing if I'd ever be able to see my mom again, or even my stepmom.
Do you feel like God ever spoke to you when you were in those situations? Did you ever feel his presence, especially specifically in Jordan?
I don't know. There's a lot of things I've forgotten. 1, I was 7, and 2, there's so much trauma that happened. I've always said I'd like to go back one day, because I feel like that would help open up my memories. There's only a few things I remember. Even going to restaurants, food helps remind me of things. The smells, when I hear like the call to prayer, because that's very distinct. You think you're called to pray 3 times a day, maybe more than that. And you hear the voice going throughout the town on a microphone. So those things really sort of bring back those memories. No, God was with me. I don't have a specific memory of that.
Because again, the whole time you're being, I don't know if this is accurate to say, it sounds accurate. You're being brainwashed in a sense.
Yeah.
Or tricked or deceived, maybe even.
Yes.
You're on a vacation. You're just visiting the family. Oh, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fun. You're going to love Jordan. It's going to be great. It's going to be fine. The whole time thinking about your mom, you're wanting to get back to your mom. Do you think your mom's thinking about you? Were you conscious of the fact of all the efforts that your mom was doing? Maybe not until after the fact?
No. So one of the tapes that's very hard for me to listen to, actually, there's a recording of me talking for the first time to my mom. I'm in Jordan. My dad allows me to call my mom, and he has sort of lectured me of don't say anything bad. Don't tell her where you are. And then he does the same thing with my mom. Don't try to get any information from Lauren. Don't say anything bad about the family. So he's prepping us. Listening to that tape was hard. There is no emotion when I'm talking to my mom. It's just like I'm talking to a stranger. And I think you sort of hit the nail on the head of brainwashed. It's traumatic. There's this separation. I was only gone 3 months. Within 3 months, I was speaking Arabic fully and already engulfed in this different culture. And there's not a lot of emotion when I'm talking to my mom, which is hard for me to hear. The men had explained a lot of this to my mom to be ready when I came back of what I might be like. In a very short amount of time, when you're young like that, your whole mind and your upbringing can be totally different. I can't tell you what Dad was saying about my mom. I don't remember any of those things. I was talking to a stranger.
Well, not to get too political, maybe that's why people are a little fired up when it comes to the influences and the things that they're bringing into our schools for our younger kids nowadays. I think this is a prime example of, I'm not saying the Arab world or the Muslim culture is wrong. Let me be clear on that. I'm not. For you, being uprooted and ripped away from the only family you ever knew, the Lamberts and your mom, essentially, that's quite the culture shock. I think your dad knew what he was doing. I think he wanted you and that he was going to do whatever it took to get you. So now let's jump back into mom. Meets this guy, and then what happens there? Because again, you somehow get reunited with your mom. I mean, obviously you're here today, so you're not still in Jordan. How does that happen?
My mom gets in the car and she heads to Fort Worth and she finds some motel room. She checks herself in and she stays there for 3 days and 3 nights. And she fasts and pray, only water, no food. And she gets on her hands and knees and she's like, God, I can't do this. This is too big for me. There are no answers. I'm not going to let no be my answer. You have to bring Lauren back. I know you can do this. And on that 3rd day, God gave her a Bible verse, Daniel 10:12. Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. God was showing my mom, I see you. I am with you. You humbled yourself before me and you came to me. She wasn't running all over the place trying to make all the phone calls the way our heads are spinning crazy, which is what I would do too. God was like, I'm waiting for you to humble yourself and come before me and seek me. Put down your cigarettes and run to me. And then God began to show areas of my mom's life where she needed to lay down. And one of them was cigarettes. And my mom said, I will stop smoking if you bring Lauren back. The other part was, if there's any areas in your life of unforgiveness, I've read the Bible and looked this up, the prayers of the righteous are heard. That unforgiveness, that bitterness, that anger, it's like it blocks that communication between you and Jesus. My mom had to wrestle. I use the word wrestle of, okay, God, show me those areas. She came out of that motel room. And when she went back to the townhouse and opened the door, Beverly looked at her and said, you don't look the same. Something has changed. And it's like she just had this peace around her for the first time in days and weeks. She actually went and got an oil change and paid some bills, normal stuff. My mom said, I'm not the same. God showed me he's going to bring Lauren back. And then she pulled out that card, and that's when she called Al. Al began to tell my mom 1 week before her meeting at the grand jury. Al was in Washington, D.C., meeting with another man by the name of Everett Alvarez. And Everett Alvarez is a really, really big deal. People in the military learn about him. He was one of the first POWs. Everett was telling Al about a group of men, I believe in North Carolina. They had organized a group called CTU. They were ex-military, and their goal was to go to Middle Eastern countries and rescue people and bring them back home. 1 week before Al being in that courtroom meeting my mom, he had just met Everett Alvarez, who knew these men in CTU. That is just Jesus. Like, you can't tell me it's not. That Al was even in that courtroom that day. My mom was like, well, I need to meet these men. And Al was like, hold on. It's going to cost a lot of money. They've never done a mission before. And the United States cannot help you. This is not going to be a military sanctioned thing. They're not in the military anymore. My mom said, I don't care. She got in contact with them, flew them to Dallas. And my mom shows up. During all of this time of her trying to make phone calls, she had been putting together binders, and I have all of those binders, detailing what my dad looks like, how many siblings he has, all of the family members, where they lived, what their careers were, every detail, all the photos of Jordan, did a drawing by memory of what the house looked like, had maps of the city. So when she came to meet with them, she was prepared. And they were pretty amazed by just her confidence. After hearing the story, they said, yes, we will agree to do this. We're not making promises. We don't know if it's going to be a success. We're all risking our lives. It's going to cost a lot of money. My mom said, I don't care. I will start pulling together the funds. Dave and Dawn and JD, they're a part of the mission. Dave's job was intelligence. He went to Jordan first to try to find an escape route. Once they find me, how are they going to get me out of Jordan? You can't put me on a plane and fly me out of there. So his job was to go there first, scout everything out, and try to find me. My mom went to Washington, D.C. with Al, trying to connect her with people because she had to try to get a passport for me without me being with her. And then entry stamps, border passes, all the paperwork to get in and out of countries. That was supposed to be a few days. It turned out my mom was there for like a week and a half trying to do all of this. Dave thought he had found an escape route, the safest place to get us out between Jordan and Israel. But he couldn't find me. He couldn't find my dad's house. Dawn and JD come in to Jordan, and their job is to try to find me. They're dressed in disguise. They're hanging out at all the tourist places. They're checking out the schools and the parks and all the things. Days and days go by. All of them are Christians as well. JD, on one of the interviews I did, told me that he was like, okay, it's time to pray. So he prays. He's standing on the street, and Dawn's a couple feet away from him. A school bus pulls up right where JD is standing. I have olive complexion skin. I have dark hair, but I have my mom's eyes, bright blue. He said he turned and looked through the windows of the bus, and I turned and I looked straight at him, and we just sort of locked eyes. And he said when he saw my eyes, he knew it was me. So he got excited and he ran over to Dawn and he sort of shook Dawn, and he's like, Dawn, I saw her. I saw Lauren. And Dawn's like, how do you know? He's like, I saw her eyes. She's on that bus. And the bus starts to drive past them. Well, they try to get in their car and follow the bus. JD said that there was like donkey carts and people everywhere, so they had lost the bus. They knew I was actually there. There were parts of the times they thought maybe my dad had taken me to Lebanon or somewhere else. So then they had to find my dad's home, and they decided to call my mom. Weeks were going by. The longer they were in country, the more risk of people recognizing that they didn't belong there. So they call my mom, and she's waiting in Cyprus with Jim, one of their men on the rescue team. And they said, Kathy, you're going to have to come to Jordan and help us find the house. We can't find the house. So she gets dressed in disguise. She flies into the capital. They drive to meet her at the airport. And as they're driving into Jerash, my mom's heart just sort of sinks in her chest and fear starts to come over her. Nothing looked the same as her photos or what she remembered. The dirt roads were now paved. The little buildings now had been built one on top of the other, like the apartment buildings I was telling you about. Nothing looked the same. So sitting in the front of that passenger seat, she got down on the floorboard and she began to cry and praying out loud while Dawn's driving and JD's in the back. And she's like, God, you've got to show me where Lauren is. You haven't brought us this far and these men this far to not even find the house. And she said it's like God began to show her the areas that she had walked so many years before. She began to remember things, and she began to say, turn left, go straight, turn right, without ever opening her eye. And then she looked up and she saw on the street corner a white car with Texas license plates. My dad had his car shipped to Jordan. She sort of froze, and finally she said, I saw Ollie's car. I saw Ollie's car. And so they said, hide your face. And about that time, Don looked out and he saw my dad come out of a building just long enough to see him. And then he went back in. So that was the first time that they found my dad's house. And again, nothing happened until my mom began to pray. Now they knew where the house was. They had found me, and now it was time to figure out a rescue. The house was situated right in the middle of the city. It was close to a police station, so they decided we can't take me from the house. It's too dangerous. They started following the school bus, thinking maybe they could get me off the school bus. There was one stop on the outskirts of town at a little farmhouse, and they decided that would be the safest place to get me. The rescue mission, the plan was one of the men would stay in a car and they would do surveillance to make sure I actually got on the bus that day, because can you imagine trying to hijack a bus and maybe I stayed home from school that day? The other thing was my mom had made reservations for us to fly out of Amman back to the States the day of the rescue, hoping that the authorities would look for us at the airport. Al Zapanta was in Washington, D.C., just sort of on alert, not knowing what was going to happen. If things go south, somehow maybe he can help. Jim Hatfield was on the Israeli border on the Israel side. They had connections in Israel and they knew what was going on that side of the border. So everyone was in place. The code word that Al came up with for that day, say everything's a go, was the sun is shining. That code word for my mom, the sun is Jesus. So even in the code word, it's like God was saying, I'm right here. I'm with you, Kathy. So that day, one of the men was in the car and he sees me get on the bus. So he drives over to where my mom is and JD and Dawn. And he says, Lauren got on the bus. My mom blocks the bus and they pull up right behind, and Dawn gets out. He goes over to the bus driver's side and he's dealing with the bus driver, trying to distract the bus driver. JD goes over to the passenger side and he's trying to open those doors to get the keys out of the ignition. And my mom goes over and she's in disguise and she sees me sitting on the bus. And like I said earlier, there's not a lot I remember. I remember this day. My mom's looking at me through that window and she's tapping on the window and she's sort of motioning to me to come and get off the bus. I froze. All I could think of is it looks just like my mom, but how can it be? She's all the way in Texas. That can't be. I think I'm dreaming. I didn't move. So my mom gets on the bus and she pushes past JD and she scoops me up and she gets my backpack and she pushes me through all the kids. As we're getting off the bus, she has to let go of my hand. Lady chaperone jumps on my mom's back and my mom turns around and she punches her in the nose and there's blood coming down her face. And so now I'm really freaking out. Okay, I think that's my mom, but I just saw her punch someone in the face. So JD sees what's happening. Don sees what's happening. They come over, they get us in the car. JD had taken the keys and threw them in some bushes, hoping that that would be a decoy and they'd go looking for the keys instead of going straight to the police. And we get in the car and we zoom off and we switch cars with Dave. Dave was just a couple blocks away. We didn't want anyone to recognize the car we used to hijack the bus. Dave had the most dangerous mission. He took that car that we had just used and he drove it back towards the city so he could be the decoy. As we are starting to drive towards Israel. It's about a 45-minute drive from where we were to Israel, to the border. As Dave is driving into the city, he gets pulled over and he is surrounded by Jordanian police. They pull him out of the car. Nothing was in his car except for a Snickers bar and a soda. And they begin to interrogate him and just speaking English the whole time, asking, where can I go fishing? Acting like a tourist. And then they bring the bus driver to him. And the bus driver is speaking Arabic, pointing to the car and saying, yes, that's the car. I don't know who this guy is. Because remember, Dave wasn't there at the hijacking. So this goes on for about 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden on the radios, the police radios, they start to hear Alia Airport, Alia Airport. Well, in moments, all of the military, all of the police, they leave Dave on the side of the road and they jump in their cars and they all drive to the airport. They were shutting down the whole airport looking for me. In one of the interviews, Dave describes that day of how he escaped out of Jordan. So while that's going on, we are driving towards the border. And on this day, it is so thick with fog, you can barely see the front of our car. My mom's pulling my uniform off. They're changing out of their disguises and into other clothes. Between Israel and Jordan, they were back then refugee camps. So we slowed our car down to hand out our clothes to the kids living in the tents on the side of the road. We continued to drive, and my mom's praying in the back seat. It is tense because we could get pulled over at any moment. In the midst of the fog, in the distance, there's a bright light. And my mom says, Dawn, what is that bright light in the distance? And Dawn said, well, Kathy, that's Israel. The sun is shining over Israel. She's like, the sun is shining in the midst of all the darkness all around us. Israel was freedom for us. So we get to the border. You've been in that area. You can't just drive your car across the border. You have to leave your car. You get on a bus. There are big high fences with barbed wire. There's towers, soldiers with machine guns across their chests. Very secured border. The men had gone across this border so many times, day after day, checking everything out. They were on high alert, thinking, what are we going to do if they realize who we are? My mom had to hand over all that paperwork that she worked so hard to get in Washington. Waiting and waiting and waiting. And we're sitting on the bus, waiting and waiting and waiting. Finally, they get on the bus and they start to drive. The way it works is in the middle of the bridge between Jordanian side and Israeli side, there's a shack where an Israeli soldier and bus driver, they switch out to drive us on over into Israel. So the bus is going pretty slow across that bridge. And as we're approaching, right as these soldiers are switching positions, there's a commotion behind us and all these cars are pulling up to the checkpoint behind us. They had just realized that we were not on the plane. We were not in the airport, but we were going over that border. By this time, it was too late. We had already crossed over. We saw the Israeli flags flying. We get out and my mom was like, she just wanted to kiss the ground. That was freedom and safety. She's hugging me and crying. I'm crying. And some women on the Israeli side, they go over to JD, and JD's this big, handsome military guy. And they go over and they're like, is that lady okay? What's going on with the daughter? Is everything okay? And JD, with tears in his eye, begins to tell the women what had just happened. He said, you see that little girl? She's been gone for 3 months, and that's her mom. And we just brought her home. And so the women start to jump up and down and thank you, Jesus. We've come to the Holy Land and we've seen a miracle. And they come over and they pray with us and they hug on us. You know, God was just with my mom the whole time in the parts of being hopeless and desperate and fearful, even providing people to celebrate us on the other side of that bridge.
Lauren, I think you should call ABC or NBC. Good gosh, I'm speechless. I think the element of this is the faithfulness of your mom to say that is not her home. And the homecoming that must have come when you came back to Texas, the reuniting with, we'll say, your American family. And to me, it begs the question, you and your dad, are you okay now? Where are you guys in that journey together?
You said the reuniting, coming back to Texas, the first person, and I have pictures. I'm just so grateful for this box in my garage. The first person I saw running down that tarmac, she was running the wrong way, was Miranda. That blonde hair, she was the first friend to greet me, and her parents, Bev and Rick, and the people that were living their life day to day, praying over me and supporting my mom. They were all there in the airport. This was January that I came back. I didn't celebrate Christmas in Jordan. They had every Christmas tree up, and we celebrated Christmas that night at my aunt's house. They were waiting for me to come home. To answer the question about my dad, my mom, talk about forgiveness. My mom was the example of forgiveness. She always encouraged me to continue to talk to my dad. We lived in hiding, changed my last name. That's another reason why I'm wanting to write a book, is to share that part of the story of all the trauma. We lived in hiding for a long time, afraid that he was going to try to get me back, and what all goes with that. And having to restart our lives. My mom spent $80,000 to get me back. We had nothing. She was selling jewelry to try to pay the rent. And then we moved to Florida to live with my grandmother, to back on our feet. Even with all of that, my mom never, ever badmouthed my dad. She always told me, and I agree with her, he took me because he loved me and he wanted to have a relationship with me in Jordan. My dad would write letters to me and mail them to my grandmother, and then my grandmother would mail them to me. That way he didn't know where I lived. So there was a huge fear. Like, I had this fear of my dad, but I wanted to know who he was. Every little girl wants to know who's their father. So that was a long journey for me. In my middle school years, we weren't as fearful. I actually talked to him on the phone. I actually saw him for the first time when I was 13 or 14 in person. and my siblings. And then in my high school years, he moved back to the States. I got to go where they lived and spend a week with their family, which is amazing that I'm even saying that. Lindale's where I graduated high school. He came to my graduation. My mom invited him into our home and cooked a meal for him. She just continued to show forgiveness and grace and God's love over and over. To this day, I don't have a relationship with my dad. I was allowed to make that decision on my own. I got to sort of know who he is for myself. I got to tell him, I forgive you. I forgive you for the things you've done. I'm not angry anymore. And truly, thank God I don't have that anger. I don't think I could share my story if I did. We don't have a relationship. I could pick up the phone and talk to him anytime.
Well, you were teasing me in the green room about an episode that you had heard that we had done about how he's making fun of the song by Chris Tomlin, You're a Good, Good Father.
Yes.
And those that know me personally outside of the show know that I can't stand this song, make fun of it on the regular. When our church does sing it, I struggle mightily to sing it. If it does come on the radio, the message on XM, I do change the channel, fully admitting. And listen, my dad was not terrible. He did not kidnap me. He just didn't meet the needs that I felt like I needed as a child. And as an adult now, it's awkward. And he even came on Father's Day for dinner. And he went to leave and didn't know how to leave. Didn't know how to say goodbye to people. And it was just awkward. And I didn't say it was awkward. My in-laws admitted openly, wow, that was awkward with Gunny, wasn't it? And I was like, okay, that wasn't just me, right? That was weird. And they're like, no, that was really awkward, Neil. Wow. That's why, as a believer, as a disciple of Jesus that I try every day to be, it's hard to look at God and go, you know what, God, you were a good, good father. It's who you are. Because I struggle with knowing that. Are you of the same thoughts, or am I different in thinking that you are?
Well, that's why I told you that, because I just listened to that episode, I think 2 days ago, and I was like, wow, yes, I'm not as passionate as you are because I've walked through the forgiveness. That's why. But so many times, praise and worship is where I just feel so close to Jesus. I just feel God's presence, healing and walking me through hard stuff. I think I even write about that part in the book, that song. How can you be a good, good father if you let this happen to me? How can you be a good, good father if you let my dad take me? You could have just stopped it from happening. Why did I have to change my last name? Why did I have to move 14 times by the time I was 16? Why was my childhood stolen from me? Why didn't I have a relationship with my father? How can you be good? Then God showed me, Lauren, I am nothing like your father. I am your heavenly father. I love you more than you could ever imagine. I am good. I am full of grace, and I will redeem. And that's why I call my podcast Redeemed. I will redeem everything that's been stolen from you. And he has. I have 2 boys and a husband, and I have my own family now. Now I can sing that song. Now when the tears are on my face, it's because I see the goodness of God.
Well, you can't see it because it's really hard to read. I wear 4 bracelets, 2 on each wrist. On my right wrist, it says redemption.
Yes.
When I say the word redemption, what does that do for you?
That he will take the broken pieces of your life and he can turn them around. He, meaning Jesus. Someone asked me recently, do you see beauty in any of your story? Yes. I do. Now, because I've opened that box, and boy, call it whatever you want, a drawer or whatever, it's hard to go back to your past. I think there's a lot of slogans of don't look back. There's so much you can learn when you can go back and see God's hand in your life. That is the beauty in the broken, and that is that redemption story.
Well, I feel like we got to go full circle. So here's your friend, Miranda Lambert. She said this in her song, The House That Built Me. I thought if I could touch this place, or if I could feel it, this brokenness inside of me might start healing. Out here, it's like I'm someone else. I thought maybe I could find myself. And to me, I think that's what coming home is about, is finally feeling comfortable at home and it's safe. When you're safe, you can do amazing things. When you know that there's solid footing, a solid foundation, you can really come alive.
Yep. That's why I can't listen to that song without all the tears, because boy, those words, they just hit.
Well, I would play it. I don't want her people to sue me.
You can sing it.
Maybe you could put a good word in for
I'll
me.
talk
I don't
to
know.
her.
Lauren, before we let you go, we're doing this new thing. I'll let our good buddy Zach take it away. Before we get to our fun that is at the end of the show, I do want to truly say thank you. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you for your mom. Thank you for all those involved. I know there are many names and mentioned a lot of them, but I just want to again reiterate, I'm proud of you for stepping out of the shadow of that, sharing your story. It's very powerful. And I got emotional. I don't often get emotional, but I got emotional. You made me get emotional. Usually it's me making people cry. You made me cry.
Thank you so much for today. I really appreciate it.
All right, well, let's turn it over to my good buddy Zach. He's going to tell us what's happening next. Zach, take it away.
It's now that time in the show to play the fastest growing game in the podcast world. We call it Heel Hustle. Today our guest will try to answer all 6 of these questions in 60 seconds or less to win an Amazon gift card. Amazon not responsible for this commercial spot, nor did they pay to let us use their name. Audience, feel free to play at home. Are you ready? Let's put 60 seconds on that clock. Ready, set, hustle!
The game begins in 3, 2, 1.
All right, Lauren, here we go. 60 seconds. It's called Heel Hustle. One person you would trade places with for a week.
Ooh, one person. Okay. That is a simple question.
Mind you, only 60 seconds.
Oh no.
All right, we'll skip that one. Guilty pleasure.
Coffee, lattes.
Nice. Best compliment you ever received.
Best compliment. Being brave.
Nice. I feel like someone just said that.
Yeah.
Worst piece of advice ever you received.
Worst piece of advice. To burn all of my letters.
Oh, wow. What is something you wish you were better at?
Being organized. Oh, and being a better speller. I love this.
Nice. Never fails to make you laugh.
The first one got me really bad.
I know, it just got you. Maybe Miranda. Trade places with Miranda for a week. That seems fun.
That would be fun. I could go hang out on her farm. That sounds like fun.
There you go. What never fails to make you laugh?
I don't know. My boys never fail to make me laugh.
I'm sure they do, especially their maturity level.
It's always said boy jokes. Yeah.
Yeah, their maturity level. Well, again, Lauren, thank you. Truly, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Really appreciate all that you shared. And as I said, your story is so powerful. So thank you for that.
Thank you too. I hope you have a fabulous day, and thanks for letting me share.
Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, that is it. That is all. That is our show today. Holy smoky bear. Wowzers. I'm running out of adjectives. How do you deal with that? Dad kidnaps you, takes you to a foreign country. These, we'll call them special forces, have to intervene. That's not something you just find in the quarter machine. That's not on Amazon. That's real life. Imagine growing up in that home. How does one reset? Now listen, I've heard it said for years, okay, my life's bad, but then you hear someone else's and you're like, it wasn't that bad. So today I ask you, I don't often ask this, will you take a moment today before you interact, before you maybe respond to something, and just ask this simple question? Here it is. What are they walking through? That's it. What are they walking through? What did they experience before they found themselves in front of you? What did they encounter before we jump to conclusions, before we even respond? What are they walking through? Take yourself out of the equation for once. If you do that, let me know. OPSpodcast.com is a great place to let me know. You can let us know on the socials at OPS Podcast Show under Facebook, Instagram, and X. And don't forget this. Do not ever forget. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.